Hurry, offer ends 16th of November. Switch to BT today and win at staying in.
All the latest stories now with the ITV Lunchtime News.
A day of firsts in Westminster for the Prime Minister and the King.
It is mindful of a legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's speech in over 70 years.
King Charles delivering Rishi Sunak's plans on the environment, on criminals, on a smoke-free Britain in a morning full of ceremonial traditions. We'll have the details of this historic state opening of Parliament and look at what voters might make of the government's direction, decisions and priorities. Also this lunchtime. Silence for the victims of Israel's deadliest day a month on as the country's bombardment of Gaza continues. Breast cancer boost, how a drug used to treat the disease will now be given to women to try to prevent it. And watch me dance, dance the night away. A stellar year for Britpop as the UK's music industry delivers a £4 billion boost to the economy.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. Written by the Prime Minister, delivered by the King. The first King's speech in 70 years has outlined what we can expect from Rishi Sunak in the year ahead. A morning of history then for both men. The state opening of Parliament was Mr Sunak's first and King Charles's first as monarch. It could be the last before the next general election. The King, a long-standing environmental campaigner, told MPs and peers that the government would support the future licensing of new oil and gas fields. He also announced tougher sentences for serious criminals and a promise of a ban on under-14s being able to ever buy cigarettes. We'll look at the political and historical significance of the speech with our political editor Robert Peston and our political correspondent Romney Weeks in just a moment. First, with the details of what was announced, here's our political correspondent Harry Horton.
The journey, the fanfare, the dress will all have felt familiar. Last year, in the late Queen's absence, then Prince Charles opened Parliament on his mother's behalf. Today, King Charles wore the robes and crown as monarch, the first king to open Parliament in 70 years.
Close the door!
The state opening is about ceremony. And some awkward small talk. First, a very personal reflection.
It is mindful of a legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's speech in over 70 years.
And then, in this most luxurious setting, the politics.
And my government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better.
This environmentalist king read out the Prime Minister's new energy laws.
This bill will support the future licensing of new oil and gas fields, helping the country to transition to net zero by 2050 without adding undue burdens on households.
In other legislation, the government plans to reform the housing market, phase out smoking and strengthen the criminal justice system, including forcing criminals to attend their sentencing.
It's critically important that the judge, if he or she wants to get that person into court, and you think of the Thomas Cashman, Olivia Pratt-Corbell, or you're thinking of Lucy Letby, of course, with the young children who were killed, if the judge wants to get that person in court, he or she should have the power to order them to do so.
Labour says today's speech was a sign of a government running out of ideas.
This is Rishi Sunak's first and possibly only chance to change the laws of this country, and he doesn't seem to have all that much he wants to change. So I think we've got a Conservative government here that's really given up on governing, that are kind of weak, out of ideas and out of road.
This is one of Rishi Sunak's final big parliamentary events before a general election. King Charles's role here is done for another year. His next King's speech will likely be before a new set of MPs and possibly a new Prime Minister. Harry Horton, ITV News.
Let's take a closer look at some of the details of the measures in that speech. There will be changes to criminal justice laws. Whole life orders will be handed down to the most horrific murderers. There will be no parole for convicted rapists. And there will be a new law forcing some criminals to attend their sentence hearings, as you've just been hearing, prompted by cases like Lucy Letby, who didn't turn up to hers. And on tobacco, the Prime Minister's pledge to phase out the sale of cigarettes was included. Children who are now 14 or under will never be able to buy cigarettes in their lifetime. New rules to regulate vaping flavours and descriptions could come into force. Also proposed for housing, new powers given to leaseholders to purchase the freehold of their property. On stolen goods, the police will have powers to search a property without a warrant. On football, there will be a new independent body to govern the top leagues in England. And there'll be a crackdown on airline surcharges, where extra fees are added for luggage space and seat choice. Our political editor, Robert Peston, is with me. A big day for the King, but politically an even bigger day for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, it is. It's his first King's speech. He took over, as you know, as Prime Minister just over a year ago in the conditions of economic chaos caused by Liz Truss's mini-budget. He's managed, with the support of his Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to bring more stability to the public finances and to the sort of general economic picture, but he hasn't had an opportunity to set out a programme for the country, and he's got one shot at it because there will be a general election next year, probably in about a year's time. So this is his only opportunity to tell us what he's all about. And it's a sort of interesting mixture of things. I mean, there are one or two quite big ideas. We already heard from the Tory party conference that he wants to progressively ban smoking. 14-year-olds will never have the legal right to buy cigarettes. That's a big thing, right? Big social change, which is going into legislation. Then there is stuff which he would say is about the long-term economic and energy security interests of the country. So we got that measure that would allow more oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. Many others would say this isn't about economic security, it's about having a row with the Labour Party ahead of the general election, because obviously Labour is committed to no more exploration in the North Sea. And then there are actually a surprising number, I've been going through the small print, of what you might call punter-friendly measures. You mentioned a ban on surcharges that you get at the end of buying an airline ticket. Actually, it's broader than that. It's a ban on what's called drip pricing. So whenever you go online, what they're saying is the price you pay for whatever it is, the goods or services, should be very clear up front. You can't get to the end of the buying process and then they say, well, by the way, if you want to take your bag on board, you're going to have to pay more. But that would apply across the board for all sorts of services. I think quite a lot of people will like that. And then in the whole sort of sentencing area, there are things that I think do address people's frustrations. I mean, lots of people say it's nuts. I can see where, somebody's nicked my mobile phone. I can see that it's in this particular house or building, but the police won't go in there and because they can't get a search warrant, or they won't get a search warrant. And so there's a measure which says police if they can see on Find My iPhone or the tracking thing that the phone is in there, they can now just bang on the door, go in and get it. So it's a funny mixture of the big and the practical.
Robert Peston, thank you very much. Thank you. We can go live now to Buckingham Palace and join our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks there. Romilly, politically a big day, historically too.
Yes, absolutely, Nina. It was a return to the royal ceremonial splendour, not seen for a state opening since before COVID. So we had that procession of gleaming horses and gilded carriages with the King and Queen in the Diamond Jubilee state coach and a separate carriage just for the crown jewels alone. I was close enough from my vantage point here to see the expressions on the faces of the King and Queen as she pointed out things to him in the crowd. And as Harry said in his report, this is the first King's speech for over 70 years. There are pictures of Charles as a very young child watching as his mother left for the same event, and the whole thing must be really imbued for him with memories of her. There was that very personal opening to the speech where he referred to the service and devotion to this country of my beloved mother. The whole speech was delivered in a tone that was particularly impassive, studied neutrality, I would say. I couldn't detect a flicker of emotion, even as the King, an environmentalist, as we know, delivered news of the government's plans to issue licenses for new oil and gas fields. A precise illustration right there of the relationship between monarch and government that this whole ceremony really represents. The words of the government spoken by a king who necessarily has no influence over the priorities of the government.
Romilly Weeks, thank you very much. Thank you. To the latest on the Israel-Gaza conflict now. Crowds have gathered across Israel to remember the victims of the Hamas attacks a month ago today, which shocked the world and led to the current war in the Middle East. With the details and the latest on the situation in Gaza, here is Yasmin Bottleby.
After a month of the deafening noise of war, silence fell over Israel today. As flags lowered, people stood by empty beds to remember those who will never come home. Many still struggling to take in the horror of what happened. At Jerusalem's Western Wall last night, 1,400 candles were lit, one for every person murdered by Hamas. A military rabbi sang a prayer for a nation whose sense of security has been shattered as the faces of the 240 people taken hostage look down. Soldiers and civilians, old and young, Israelis and foreigners. Inside Gaza, the place and its people are shattered by a month of Israeli bombardment. Hamas says more than 10,000 Palestinians have been killed. This morning, more were pulled from the rubble after blasts in the southern city of Khan Yunis.
We were sleeping. We're peaceful people. We were sleeping. Babies, children, elderly people.
As people frantically search for survivors, parents race to hospitals looking for their children. This mother did find her son alive. Not every family was so lucky. Israel's immediate military objectives have been clear: destroy Hamas and bring the hostages home. But now, for the first time, Prime Minister Netanyahu has hinted at who could end up running Gaza in the long term.
I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility, because we've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine.
The scale and the human cost of this conflict continues to grow. And for those caught up in it, notions of a time after war must seem very far away. Yasmin Bottleby, ITV News.
Still ahead this lunchtime, how did a couple die on a holiday in Egypt? The inquest opens into their deaths. And the British music stars boosting the economy. First, let's bring you some good health news for women. Almost 300,000 women in England are to be offered a drug to reduce their risk of developing breast cancer. Scientists have found that as well as treating the disease, the hormone therapy anastrozole can also prevent it. It could save lives and save the NHS millions of pounds in treatment costs. Charlie Frost is with me. Who exactly could be offered this drug then?
Well, as you say, almost 300,000 women in England are considered to be at a moderate or high risk of developing breast cancer. But now, after successful trials, NHS England says that using anastrozole as a preventative drug could reduce the number of cases of the disease by almost half. So we're talking fairly big numbers there. Now, the drug itself has been used for years to treat breast cancer in women, but now it's going to be offered to postmenopausal women who have a family history of breast cancer. And it's believed that if just a quarter of those eligible take up the drug, and then just half of those end up taking it for the 5 years that you're recommended to take it, that it could prevent 2,000 cases of cancer. Now, GP Dr. Sarah Jarvis has told ITV News that this is a big step forward.
There's no point in talking to your GP if you haven't gone through the menopause. But if you have, and you have several members of your family, more than one at least, who's gone through breast cancer, or one member of your family who was diagnosed with breast cancer at a very early age, do speak to your GP, because they may be able to refer you to a specialist for assessment, and that specialist could decide that you were entitled.
Well, the drug works by cutting down the amount of estrogen that the body makes. And as Dr. Jarvis was saying, it's taken in tablet form, smaller than a paracetamol, and you take it daily for 5 years. So if you do think you are eligible or you believe you're at a higher risk of developing breast cancer, the advice to women is to contact your GP, who can refer you for a risk assessment.
Charlie Frost, thank you. The family of Captain Sir Tom Moore has lost an appeal against the demolition of an unauthorised spa pool block at their home. Hannah Ingram Moore and her husband had appealed against the order by Central Bedfordshire Council. An inquest has opened 5 years after a British couple died on holiday in Egypt. John and Susan Cooper were suddenly taken ill after reporting a strange smell in their room. A forensic examination has suggested E. coli was a cause of death, but Public Health England says toxic chemicals were to blame possibly. Our reporter Ben Chapman is at the inquest in Blackburn. Ben, what has the inquest heard so far?
Well, we've been hearing from the couple's daughter, who was on holiday with John and Susan Cooper at the time and discovered her parents seriously ill in their hotel room. She's been fighting for the last 5 years for answers about how her parents died. John and Susan were described in court here today as both being healthy and energetic in their 60s and enjoying their holiday when they very quickly became ill and died. It was a Thomas Cook package holiday they were on. They were staying at a 5-star hotel in the resort of Hurghada. Now, the Egyptian authorities have always maintained that they died as a result of natural causes because of E. coli. But over the years, the coroner and the family have had problems trying to get hold of the full post-mortem results, access to the examination of the couple's hotel room. The coroner said today the hotel itself is still refusing to cooperate with this inquest. So today, the couple's daughter Kelly and her children came to court for this inquest. Kelly broke down in tears as she described how she discovered her parents disorientated and watched her father collapse. Her daughter Molly, who was just 12 at the time, was on the same holiday and had been staying in the couple's room. She said they'd had problems with the air conditioning, that it was making a strange smell like cooking when it was turned on. Now, the coroner has said some experts have raised the possibility the couple may have died from carbon monoxide poisoning. It will be his job over the next 2 days to determine how this healthy couple died while on holiday. Ben Chapman, thank you. More than 1,000 Amazon workers have begun a 3-day walkout in a long-running dispute over pay. Members of the GMB union at the company's Coventry site are on strike for 3 days and will take further industrial action later this month.
And cases of fuel theft from petrol stations have soared, according to new research by the RAC Foundation. Almost 40,000 people between July and September this year drove off without paying for fuel. That's an increase of 77% on the same period in 2022. The motoring organisation says a huge rise could be down to systematic criminal activity. And many schools have been closed in northern France after severe flooding following heavy rain. Several municipalities in Pas-de-Calais are under a red flood alert with more rain forecast. Finally, is the music industry Britain's best export? It's certainly financially super successful, with the likes of Harry Styles and Dua Lipa delivering a stellar £4 billion boost to the economy, from touring the world to streaming songs old and new. Sally Biddulph on the Britpop bounce.
It wasn't just her song, it was the soundtrack for millions over the past year. Harry Styles' Love on Tour concert racked up £500 million in ticket sales, selling out across Europe and America.
So I'm dancing with my eyes closed, 'cause everywhere I look I still see you.
Styles was only outdone by fellow Brit Ed Sheeran, who sold more concert tickets in 2022 than any other artist. From packed stadia in London to Brussels. Sheeran was the king of concerts. Along with the likes of Adele and Coldplay, British artists had a bumper year, making £4 billion for the UK economy, becoming one of our biggest exports in a post-COVID comeback.
From what I've seen, the money is all coming in through ticket sales to concerts, people going multiple times to see the same artist perform the same set over and over again, just for the enjoyment of both being in a packed out arena and listening to their favourite bands play live.
Concerts did well for Dua Lipa too, but downloads were also a money spinner. Top 10 billing of most streamed UK artists globally included her, Harry Styles, Ed Sheeran, Arctic Monkeys and even the Beatles. Forever Constant, Coldplay came in at number 4. British talent still hitting the high notes on a world stage. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
Mary's here later from me. Bye-bye.
Visibility may be low this evening.